of CoachConnect. As usual, we're just waiting for a second to all our live broadcasts to sync up. And once we do, we'll officially get started. If you have any questions for us or our guest today, please put in the chat. I'll be monitoring throughout the episode, and we'll go live momentarily. Okay, so we are synced up on all surfaces. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. Okay, so welcome back to CoachConnect. Here's where we explore the stories and strategies and insights from trailblazers who are transforming the world of coaching and well-being. What drives their success? What fuels their passions for helping others? We're here to uncover their secrets and share them with you. This show is brought to you by Valu.io, the all-in-one coaching platform designed to empower coaches with tools, resources, and support they need to thrive and help their clients achieve meaningful, long-lasting growth. I'm Dr. Diego Salinas, your guide on this journey. As a neuroscientist, physician, health coach, and co-founder of Vibely, I'm committed to celebrating the incredible work of coaches everywhere and helping them unlock their full potential. So together, let's dive in deep into what makes coaching a powerful force of change. Excuse me. Today's guest, Dr. Carylynn Kemp Larson, is a dynamic professional speaker who helps leaders and teams navigate challenging and building resilient, connected cultures. Excuse me. With more than a decade of experience speaking at conferences, corporate events, and leadership summits, she's known for delivering keynotes that blend research, personal insights, and practical tools that stick. Her work spans corporate, government, and nonprofit sectors, alongside faculty roles in institutions like George Washington University and the American University. She holds a PhD in industrial and organizational psychology from George Mason University, has logged tens of thousands of coaching hours in consulting, and brings over 17 years of experience leading a national mental health nonprofit. So, Carylynn, so great to have you on the episode today. Thank you for being on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
And sorry to all our guests here. I had a little something in my throat here. Get a little self-care. So, as a first episode, we always want to get started kind of hearing your backstory. You have a very impressive, long resume, but kind of really curious if you could say in your own words, what led you into focusing in this field and helping others in the way that you're supporting them?
Sure. So, yeah, this episode is really around coaching and mental health. And so I guess where I'll start is that I, long before I was integrating, supporting folks in their mental health journeys into my coaching, I was a person who was speaking about mental health. So in my intro, you mentioned that I, for 17 plus years ago, I founded a mental health nonprofit. Well, you don't do that unless you have your own mental health journey or at least have been touched or inspired by someone who has. And in my case, it was my own journey. So I began the really hard work of founding that nonprofit as I was breaking free from an eating disorder. And that was back in 2007. And I struggled with that for 7 years before I got to that point of really breaking free from it. And at that point, I realized that the biggest barrier from where I was to the life I really wanted to be leading was the stigma in my own head. And I realized that the more that I just was honest about what was going on for me, the less that stigma could be a blocker for me. So, as an example, I had to take a leave of absence from work to go into residential treatment. And I really struggled with the question of what to say about where I had been and even what to say
Mm,
to my boss when I, asked for indefinite time off. And I just, it's at some point I recognized that if I was in hiding with it, that was only going to hurt me. And so I was honest and I started just opening up about what was going on for me. And in doing so since that time, I've been very open about my journey. And um, as a nonprofit founder as well, you're really responsible for a lot of the well-being of the organization, do a lot of fundraising, things like that. And so I was constantly telling my story and talking about my story.
Mm,
And then it was about 6 years after that that I got certified as a coach and started coaching. And so people already knew that I had this mental health journey. People knew that I had founded this organization. They could easily jump on the internet and, hear me tell my story. And I think that that just changed the way my clients showed up for me, right? My clients, even though I work as a leadership coach, executive coach, that's my area of expertise. My clients would, and they were not coming to me for certainly not counseling. I'm not a therapist at all. I have a PhD in industrial organizational psychology, as you
mhm.
mentioned. They were coming to me with everyday leadership challenges. A lot of their challenges were with their own mental health and with the mental health of their people, broadly defined, right? Not defined as a diagnosis, but defined as a state of being, struggling with anxiety, struggling with burnout, with overwhelm, with constant stress. And so they would bring those things to me. And I was really blessed to be a safe space for those conversations to happen.
Yeah. It was saying research is me search, right,
Mm.
Carolyn, right? And you mentioned that we could be our own barriers at times, right? That if we're honest with ourselves out loud, that allows us to kind of put out there and own it, and then actually name it attainment in a certain sense, be able to move forward versus that guilt and shame that can really be withdrawing and avoidance cycles.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm convinced for both myself, and I've seen it play out time and time and time again with the clients that Rock Recovery, the nonprofit that I founded, serves, is that there's such a strong correlation between our willingness to just um, destigmatize ourselves by n- rejecting the fear and the shame around it and being willing to open up and talk very openly about it. And really, breaking free from it, long-term recovery.
Yeah, right. So it's so important and so valuable to discuss it, but the hard thing is this is not something very much talked about. So I spoke at a conference recently, and this taught mental health and coaching. So and executive coaches. I'm curious, what would you say to coaches who are afraid to discuss mental health with their clients because they don't want to either violate ethic rules or professional standards or kind of scope of practice? How would you approach those conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to say is that there's there are absolutely some lines there, right? There are ethics around
Mm,
that. There's professional boundaries that we don't want to cross. And one of those would be to label something or to diagnose someone, right? Like none of us as coaches with our coach hat on have any right to diagnose someone. Um, and that said, there's a lot you can do short of diagnosing someone, and you
mhm.
don't therefore have to let the fact that somebody is struggling with something that's mental health related shut down the entire conversation, right? The other thing that I learned going through my coach training is that, coaching is very much about what's happening right now, the present, and very much about where someone wants to go and where they see themselves and moving towards that, vision for their future. And and sometimes, right, therapy is described as being very much about the past and really digging into what's happened in the past. So as a coach, like we don't need to go into that past, and we know that. And at the same time, there's a lot that we can do to help people think about why is life worth living, right? And like, what
Mm,
is the life that's worth living? And how do I move towards that? And there's a lot that we can do to help people recognize the stigma that they're sitting in and the ways that in which they're getting in their own way of getting the professional, like really clinical therapeutic care that they absolutely need and that we can't provide. But we can be that safe space and that community that helps them connect with that care that they need.
Yeah, there's so much there, and so I think that safe space, right? mentioned this to the talk that even if we aren't the experts in all these things, someone's coming to us to help them get to that next level, that fulfillment, that achievement. So if we can create an environment that we welcome all kinds of conversations, even if we're not the expert, we can help guide someone to that step. Use our coaching skill set to find a therapist, find a counselor. If we feel that the support is out of our scope of practice, we can still support them in getting to those levels.
Yeah, absolutely. In the same way that, someone might come to me and it have nothing to do with mental health, right? It's about hitting their targets or some other like massive organizational transformation and navigating all the intricacies of that. I might have no expertise in bottom line corporate P&L or whatever it might be, but that doesn't prevent me from being a great coach to that person. They're not asking me to be their new CFO, right? They're asking me to help
Right.
them think through how to make their company successful. And in the same way, right, they're not asking me to be their therapist. They may very much be asking me to help them think through what they need for themselves to get to the life that they really want.
Yeah. And you said, topics that aren't involving mental health. This reminds me of a quick story. I had a client maybe a year or so ago, and I do mostly mental health coaching, whether burnout, research is research, or help parents as well with my background in pediatrics. But um, we're discussing something. She started talking about her work a little bit. And then she says, "Oh, sorry, Diego. That's not a health and wellness topic. My bad." And I said, "Can I challenge us? Can I challenge you?" I was like, "If you're thinking about it, where does that mostly happen?" In your brain. It affects your neurochemistry, your physiology, your hormone release, right? So, with that lens, to me, there's nothing that doesn't fall under a wellness topic. Your
Mhm.
financial well-being, the stress management at work. So, I may not be the expert in her career transition or resume writing, but we can still bring into discussion how it ties and someone feels unified. I think what coaching really comes in is that seeing that whole person, all these parts coming together to get to that long-term goal.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's so easy for us to think that mental health, because of the way our society has seen it, is something that, you know, it should be kept private and right, like we don't want to bring it up and we don't want to talk about it and they don't want to talk about it either. And when we bring all of that energy into the conversation, yeah, they definitely don't want to talk about it, right? Because if it's that
Yeah.
taboo, then like we've created that barrier versus just making it safe.
Yeah. And so there is this that taboo, and I think I've seen, at least in my short experience, depending on where someone's coming from, when they're coming for executive coaching, they kind of say lots of different topics. So how have you can you maybe talk about how you've supported mental health of your executive coaching clients and what that's been like?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of it is just showing up for the conversation and not making it awkward for my clients to talk about anything that is on their mind. Showing up, making it safe to for my clients to talk through what they're experiencing. Um, and not trying to fix it or certainly not label it, as we've just said. So, yeah, it's really just as your story so um so nicely describes, it's really about normalizing that if this is something that is going on for you, then we are whole people. You can't section that part of yourself off and say that it doesn't impact your leadership, it doesn't impact your goals. Like that's not a thing. So it is relevant. And certainly, right? Like I never force a conversation. Uh, but I never have had to, right? And it comes up all the time because
Yeah.
people need an outlet. They need a place to talk about how they're really doing. Are they really
Yeah.
good? Are they really fine? I don't know. More
Uh,
of us these days feel like we're treading water or we're drowning or we're barely surviving. Right? There's far more of us on that end of the spectrum.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, laugh about it, but I think we all can resonate, right? Because it's kind of our outward face versus our inward face, and our culture definitely says it's very all or none, black or white, like do it all right or something bad happens. So, especially when you're in a position of leadership where people are looking up to you, this idea of like if someone sees my faults, sees my flaws, I'm not going to be a good leader, right? And so there, I think this has a confidentiality to Caroline. It has a safe space. I'll be honest with you. I tell all my clients for discovery call. You mentioned therapy and coaching. I mentioned the differences, and I've heard this analogy. Therapy is archaeology, coaching is architecture. Looking at the past, building for
I
the
love
future.
that.
And I agree that I think with coaching, we're always present, going future, and we acknowledge the past because it dictates our present. We might have certain values based on the past. I don't need to know every single story to understand legacy is important for you,
Mhm,
right? Or but what's the bottom line here? And but I do tell my clients the similarity between me and a therapist is confidentiality.
mhm.
So whatever you and I talk about, the reason why Bible is HIPAA compliant, like I want you to, because really we don't know what someone has to share to create a safe space physically, technologically wise, to create those opportunities so things can come up transdiagnostically. You mentioned not diagnosing it, right? You don't have to have, I think what's magic about coaching is you don't have to have a panic attack to improve your stress management.
Mhm.
You don't have to have major depression to work on your resiliency, right? You don't have to have ADHD to work on your focus or OC to work on your flexibility, right? And so if we allow that and even talk about limits, it could be hard to talk about those limits of confidentiality. To my clients, listen, if there's active uh, want to hurt yourself, someone else, that's a medical emergency. Of course, I want to support you, not report you, support you. And I think some people I've trained, they have this feeling if I bring that up, I'm going to be either putting an idea in their head or do something bad. But actually, studies show the more you bring this up, the more people can really be, like you mentioned, Carolyn, that bring their whole self to the equation so you can start solving those problems.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's I mean, you're starting to touch on some of the really insidious ways that stigma keeps us from getting the care that we need, right? Is the person
Mm,
suffering, stigma, what is that? It's fear and shame that's associated with
mm,
something that society has,
yeah,
decided that it should be associated with.
yeah.
And mental health is certainly one of those. And so, what are people afraid of? They're afraid of being seen as weak, right? They're afraid of being seen as um, like not resilient enough or smart enough to like think their way out of it. And that's where the shame comes from too, is these messages of, if I can't break myself out of this, then that means
Mm,
something's wrong with me. But we would never think that of someone who was struggling with a physical illness, right? We'd never think that somebody was weak because they couldn't break themselves out of cancer, right?
right.
That's nuts. And so
Yeah.
it's a good parallel. And so when we recognize that, you know, that's that is literally something that holds people back from even opening up about what's really going on for them, then as the coach, you really have to think about, how do I make it safe for them to recognize that I'm not going to judge them, right? If anything,
Mm,
I will honor that and recognize that this means courage. This means strength, right? This is the epitome of resilience. Um, so, my experience is the way that you do that is you open up about your own challenges, right? You admit that you're not superhuman. So, as coaches,
yeah.
right, we're taught that it's not about us, and it's not, right? But there's a fine line between making the conversation about us, which you don't want to do, and being willing to be a bit vulnerable just to show that, like, look, there's no judgment here, right? We all have our
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's so much there, Caroline. One time a client, I've told this story before, but we were talking and my background's in neuroscience, like nerding out about what we think is happening, right? Because who really knows? And then that can empower you to see patterns and make changes, right? And some of my clients, they say, as long as you know it, you're good. Others want to know what I know to the T. So I'll share as much as meet them where they're at. And at one point, I was discussing this. I forgot what we were talking about, negative bias, or I forgot what it was exactly. But she goes, Diego, oh, your life must be so easy. You know how the brain works. And I was like, I have to pause you here to your point, right? I was like, listen, not me, not human. No one like really fully knows how it works yet, right? We're learning about it, and let's learn. And I said, even if I didn't know how it works, so wave a magic wand and somehow I can hold all this in my head. I go, doesn't mean my brain doesn't work that way. Just because I know of negative thought traps doesn't mean I don't have negative thought traps, right? And to the point analogy I've made is you can be a GI doctor and get sometimes upset stomach, right? It's not going to be you're just studying the human condition. I think as coaches we see so many different human conditions, and what's in common is we all things we're good at and things we struggle in. I'm being very broad brushstrokes here. And we
Mhm.
see that, and because we're going to see that vulnerability that you mentioned that people often don't show to the world. And I think if we can say, I mean, I'll be honest with you, my own shame and guilt story in residency. I was really burnt out, missed some days, had to make it up. I just withdrew. When I share with people who are I'm coaching adolescents, they go, but yeah, we all trip and fall. Resiliency is how you fall, soften, and get back up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
pull about vulnerability. Actually, I can make another point there, Carolyn. Sorry, is I read this recently this last week, and it kind of got me thinking. If I can throw this out here, that we say we value vulnerability a lot. Like we talk about that and lifts it, vulnerable, be open. But it's saying we really value vulnerability in a way it's not really vulnerable. We want your vulnerability to be an already resolved vulnerability. Oh, I realized I have this, I did this, and now I'm aware of it. It's like we want a nice little package bow versus like, I still don't know what I'm doing every morning when I wake up. Right? That sloppiness feeling. And so I think there's also a differentiation in our culture, right? We say we want it, but we don't actually hold that space socially for the real vulnerability that's messy versus the explanation of vulnerability.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. Yeah, I've baked vulnerability into this like recipe that I share with people
Mm.
to be the community that we want to be. And I will often quiz people on, okay, right? Like, how would you express vulnerability in this scenario?
Mm.
And it's really fascinating how many people go to um, sort of like sympathizing with people or even empathizing with people, but not that ability to express something that they are ashamed of, right? Like that's what it would take to really
Yeah.
express vulnerability. And not something that you were ashamed of like years and years ago and aren't ashamed of anymore.
Right.
I
Like
mean,
my
like
back 10 years ago.
ashamed of right now. If you want to make it safe for someone to talk about something that they're ashamed of, then you have to be willing to say something that you're ashamed of. And not obviously not talking about just checking a box here, but like really go there with the person. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's it's important.
Patterns. Almost I'm thinking in my head now, it's like rehearsed vulnerability. We're talking about what happened, the stuff we're already kind of quote unquote over and on that side. And I think life is humbling because like, oh, if I was blind to that, then what's going to happen now? And if I have one more thing about non-judgment, there, Carolyn, right? So, because a lot of our audience is coaches, and comes up. There's some interesting research on this, and I always tell my clients, my goal is to create a space of non-judgment.
Mhm.
So you're going to see, I'm not going to use words like good, awesome, amazing, because when we use socially the word non-judgment, we mean don't say anything negative. But to everyone listening, if I say to, hey, Carolyn, I love that picture behind you, no one goes, stop judging my picture.
Yeah.
I love your earrings. Stop judging what I'm wearing, right? It's not what happens. They only mean that to say, don't say anything negative, right? But to all the coaches there in training, if I love her picture, I can hate her picture. If I think it's a really pretty earring, I think it's a really ugly earring. If I'm proud of you, I could be disappointed in you. And there's a study showing there's therapists and coaches, and they would have them use the word good. I used to do this all the time in medicine. Good job, good, like little kids. Good job, good job. When I started coaching, it's good, 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 good. And they have the therapist or the coach say this positive judgment, kind of sprinkled in. And then halfway through the session, they have them stop saying it. What they notice is people's heart rate will go up slightly and their sweat more. Their skin conductance goes up. They may not be even aware of it, but there's this change like, where's my reward? Where's my
Mhm.
external reward? Right? Even whether the body understands and keeps the sports, it's all one thing. So I think for behavior change too, it's really important that we actually stick to non-judgment in a almost clinical definition or scientific definition versus, and if you're a coach and you say good job, I've done it before, I go, let me back up here. That's a judgment. Let me try again. Right. And we can talk about the tools to
Yeah.
use otherwise, but yeah, non-judgment is more complex than it seems.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah, I mean, this is a little beyond our conversation today, but yes, in the spirit of supporting all the coaches listening in on the podcast, certainly not using those positive word like affirmations in coaching. It can be really hard. And I've found that I have some clients that are so trained to expect it that if they don't get it, they think they're doing something wrong and they just freeze up, totally
Hmm.
freeze up. And then they can't even participate in the coaching conversation. So,
Yeah.
yeah, you also have to meet your client where they are. But at some point,
Yeah.
right, how do you, in a loving way, bring that into the coaching of, hey, right, I've noticed that
Yeah.
you start to think you're doing something wrong if I don't
Yeah.
acknowledge the work that you're doing here. And what do they,
Yeah.
what's the implication for them in terms of, their life journey?
This must tie into my next question I'm gonna pose here, but I think for me, that's why the discovery call or explaining what it's gonna be like. I say, listen, this is gonna feel very different than normal talking, but we're doing it differently to get different results. Like silence, something I'm always working on. Off camera, I talk very fast, even on camera often, actually. Right? And to say it's gonna feel weird, it's gonna feel awkward, but we're doing this for this particular reason. It's gonna feel weird for me not to give you things, but I'm gonna do this for a particular reason. So inviting that new change of or the mindset shift. And on those lines, I was wondering, so you've done a lot of work with as a coach, but a lot of work you is also teaching leaders to coach, right? And some of the skill set here and how that might apply to leadership. So how can this coaching skill set, some of what we're kind of talking about here, help leaders support mental health for at work or for their workers?
Yeah. In the same way that uh, as coaches, we can really help people think through what they need for themselves. Leaders can use coaching skills to do that same thing. And I think it's important, therefore, that to kind of say that, one way that I help leaders differentiate what coaching conversations are versus the conversations that they're already having is it's the question of, okay, how do we help as a leader? Well, often what we do is we either solve something for someone, like they come to us and they say, I've got this big challenge and I don't know what to do. And we say, okay, why don't you go try this? Right. So, like, we're doing the solving for them as the leader. Or we take a step back from that and we say, well, let's brainstorm together, right? Have you tried this? Have you tried that? And like what and so we do some like collaborative problem solving, which is perhaps a bit more empowering than just solving it for them. But coaching is like even further in terms of letting the ownership lie with the person. And when it
Mm,
comes to mental health, we can't fix that. And we don't have the expertise to problem solve with it. And in fact, it's sort of akin to someone's feelings, right? We can't fix their feelings. We can't problem solve for their feelings. Like, you can't solve it. You just need
mm,
someone to think through what is really going on for them and like move through it and perhaps do what they need to do to really get the professional help that they need. And so, what leaders
mm,
can do is bring a coaching approach to those conversations. And that actually keeps them out of crossing those professional boundaries that they're so afraid to cross. Mostly, for very good reason. I've had colleagues, so working as a coach, working as a consultant, my colleagues are often sort of business partners, right? Clients of mine. I've had clients slash colleagues tell me that their HR department just says, like, you just come to HR, right? Like, you don't have those conversations with your people. Don't go there.
Mm,
Um,
wow.
but taking a coaching approach gives you a way as a leader, I think, to actually navigate that, because you're not the one that's bringing it up, right? You're not the one who is trying to address the mental health piece. You're the one who's listening and sharing that vulnerability of your own, and then just asking some really powerful questions to help the person think through what they need.
Yeah, yeah. And it is true, the word, as you're describing, is how coach is used so much as to tell someone to do,
Mm.
right? It's like, I want to coach them on something, right? Instruct them. And really, that coaching mindset is create that space where that person is this kind of partnership, and be able to not be have to be expert in something, but hold space for someone to bring those up, and know how that's you welcome the whole person in there, right? And even if you're not the expert there, and people they're seen, they feel heard, the reality is going to help your ROI, your retention. There's a lot of evidence showing that, right? That if you as a leader, and some of these coaching skill sets, I think, are a really great way to operationalize things like reflections, right? Like those things before, like learning about them, like, oh, I do those naturally, but I realized, oh, you can teach someone to do a reflection as a way to like kind of buffer. Or frankly, the biggest mindset shift for me was someone told me while I was training, Diego, stop trying to solve their problems. That's not your job anymore. As a manager, you might be solving company problems, but it's kind of, so it's how to use some of these skill sets to help them also solve your own problems. Because you have to be problem focused. It could be improving for improving, but to
Yeah.
have their own growth and be in charge of their own growth.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. As a manager, when you really look at it through the lens of when should I coach versus when should I solve, or right, like be a collaborative problem solver, it really, the big question is, what as the manager do I own about this? Right? What do I own? And when it comes to someone else's mental health, like, you don't own their mental health. And so coaching becomes almost the only viable approach. And so many leaders don't have those coaching skills. And then we wonder why leaders feel so paralyzed, right? Because think about it, if you can't fix it, you can't. And it also, you could try to like collaboratively problem solve through it, but that's never works. Um, then there really is nothing you can do. And so this is
Yeah.
one of those areas where coaching skills become actually a foundational leadership skill. I've worked with a lot of companies that when they think of teaching leaders to coach, they think, well, like, we really just need to work on the basics, right? We need to work on how to have performance conversations and how to give feedback effectively. And like, that's advanced. I'm like, no, no, let's flip that. Like, this is basic. Like, all your leaders need to know how to coach. And if they know how to
Yeah.
coach, then you can easily teach them to share some feedback and coach around it. And you can easily teach them how to deliver a performance evaluation and then coach around it. Like, because what good is feedback or some sort of rating if the person isn't able to think through, how do I make this meaningful to me and what do I do with this information? Right. And then we get into the realm of like
Yeah.
delivering feedback or like delivering performance ratings. And then we get into all the research on, how performance ratings in particular can do more harm than good. Right. And then the industry
Right.
dropped ratings and that didn't work. So we're
Mm.
missing this fundamental ability to show up in a way that helps people think through things more expansively, more deeply, and with forward momentum, not by themselves. Not by themselves. You're not punting them away from your office and saying, you go figure it out. That's yours to solve for. You're saying, like, let's talk through it together. I'm happy to help you think through it. You're staying in the conversation with them.
Mm. Yeah, something you mentioned earlier, I'll be honest, it gave me a parallel to my time in healthcare where almost avoidance of something due to lack of skill set or knowledge in it, right? Like I'm not going to 10-foot pole, right? So, for example, I used to want to do hospital medicine, like inpatient kind of acute stuff. So your kid's not breathing right, or fluids lost, but I wasn't doing um, outpatient stuff like potty training, those kind of things, right? Or picky eaters. Right? It's a huge problem. But that was like, okay, someone, I'm like, I don't really know, that's someone else. I worked at a preschool for you. I'm like, oh, I finally learned this stuff because I had to help these kids do all those things. And that is confidence there. So I think it's natural to human beings to avoid things that we don't feel expert in or not sure, especially when it's something that we feel like there's a gravity to it, mental health. What if I do it wrong and I make it worse? And so you're saying if we can teach these leaders the coaching skills, and I might go draw a little further here, Carolyn, that it's a skill set and the mindset together. Because as you're describing this, my analogy came to mind is like the skill set to learn the scales. I can learn a C major scale or pentatonic blues. But that's not how I'm going to jam or write a song improv. I have to understand, oh, these instruments are together. What's that a partnership approach? Because frankly, when I learned motivational interviewing in med school, is really like ask these questions so they do what you want them to do. Don't you want to quit smoking to see your kid more? Right? Like, so the skill set does not equate to the mindset. And I think teaching those people the mindset allows them to then make those personalized adjustments to those people in front of them, right? Because you understand the theory of what you're trying to accomplish with some tools to do it. And then as the craftsman, craftswoman, craftsperson, you are adjusting to that person because it's a dynamic process. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And when we teach leaders to coach, we actually teach mindset first, to your point,
Nice.
and then, yes, and then skill set, and then also a coaching approach. Because coaching conversations, they have a different rhythm to them, right? They're not just
Yeah.
everyday conversations. They're very focused on what the person really needs right now. They're very much in pursuit of that as the outcome. And then there's like the unlocking and the exploring that most people think about. And then there's the back end of the conversation, which is, really around clarifying what the person's truly committed to going and doing
Mm.
and setting it up as a continuous conversation over time. And which is super important for leaders because leaders don't have hours upon hours to sit down and boil the ocean with someone. They might have 10 minutes. And so we teach leaders to coach in like 10-minute increments, right? Just like really get in there, what's stopping you, unlock it, get the person moving. And then when do we pick this up? Where do we pick this up? And continue the conversation then so that people are really doing the breaking through in between the conversations, not necessarily during them.
Joined from Riverside. Let's see.
I can see you, Diego. Good on my end.
Seems like my internet went down. I'm trying to log on here on my phone. Let's see.
You're good from my side. I could just hijack the host role, y'all, and keep going. But that seems mean. So we'll wait for Diego to get back connected. Poor Diego.
Hotspot.
So how about this?
Let me try something here.
I'm going to give him one more second.
Okay, am I back?
You were never gone, Diego.
Okay, hi everyone. Sorry, my internet. I was never gone. It just froze. My internet said, "Please try to reconnect. Make sure you're stable." So I was looking at my phone to reconnect. Okay, so I lost you at pretty early on when we started talking. My internet completely froze. If you were looking down, I was trying to sign onto my phone to reconnect. So I apologize. Going live, things happen.
No worries.
Would you
I made a
mind
couple
repeating
jokes.
yourself? I missed all of that.
It's okay. I don't think I have to repeat it because the audience heard it. And I made
Okay,
a couple
great.
of jokes about how I could just hijack the host role and keep going, but I didn't think that'd be very nice. So we just watched you as you reconnected. You're good.
Okay. I was like, all right, everyone, I'm trying to reconnect here. Great. Okay.
It's all good.
So I guess one thing I had before you started talking was talking about those differences. I'm curious, is there any particular thing as you're teaching these leaders, like things in common that are really unblock this kind of change of perception, like kind of or misconceptions are holding that you see commonality that really, once they understand the difference, helps them with the breakthrough?
With the breakthrough around coaching or with the breakthrough around mental health?
Ooh, let's leave it open ended and let's choose the latter. The latter.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Actually, I'm really glad you asked that question. You know, there you start to get into the question of what helps us destigmatize things, right? Like if stigma
Right.
is a blocker, then how do you break through stigma? And there's lots of research on that. And it usually starts with like flat out education, right? You learn the facts. And the facts are usually not aligned with the common thinking because the fear and the shame is confiscated the truth. And so I like to kind of do like a fact and fiction exercise with people, right? Like,
Okay.
so for example, a fact is that mental health is a state of being, not a diagnosis, right? But most people actually think that it's not mental health unless you have a diagnosable condition. And that's just not
Right.
true, right? So there's a
Right.
fact for you. Another fact is that absolutely anyone out there, any of the high performing, amazing coaches out there listening, any of your clients, any of your colleagues, your friends, your family, neighbors, any of us can experience like significant mental health challenges. So if it's a state of
Yes.
being and it has a large spectrum, any of us can be at that very far end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And so, I can tell my personal story around that. And I won't go all the way into it here, but I'll just say that I didn't grow up with mental health challenges. I did not experience them until I was a young professional in the workplace, right? And doing my doctorate. And then when I did start to experience, like when I fell into my eating disorder, it was fast and furious, like addiction. And I
Mm.
was extremely ill within a year. And then I stayed extremely ill for about 5 years and then started like a very slow like crawl out of that deep dark pit. But like there is no genetic immunity to mental health conditions. So that's a fact. And the fiction is like, well, if I've made it this far, then it won't happen to me, or I'm safe from it,
Mm.
right? Or I must not be
Yeah.
wired like that. That's just not a thing. And then the third that I like to point out too is, we often also think that mental health challenges are not relevant to us as high performing working professionals, right? That like, yeah, sure, like that
I wish
I
that were true.
own all of that, but you're not talking about my company, right? Like you're not talking about in my workplace. You're not talking
Yeah.
about around me. And yeah. right? In fact, we are. And one of the most compelling statistics I've seen recently, I used to quote a statistic that 20% of adults report struggling with some kind of mental illness. So, again, I'm talking about that end of the spectrum. But
Right.
recently, I found a study that said that 15% of employees report struggling with significant mental health challenges.
Hmm.
So, right, I mean, you can look at that 20% of adults and you can try to factor out the unemployment rate and all of that, and you get to about the same answer. But then that second study was only a study of fully employed individuals, and it showed the same thing. So we've got multiple data points that point to the fact that about 1 in 6 of the people that we work with, right, are struggling with significant mental health challenges. And, in fact, we all know people that are extremely high performing until they finally perhaps crash. And then you recognize that the crash wasn't the mental health crisis, it had been going on for decades, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, right. We are talking about right now, at this point in time, 1 in 6 of working professionals struggle with significant mental health challenges, anxiety, depression, addiction, suicidal ideation, right? Significant mental health challenges. So, yeah, education goes a long way, right? And you add all three of those things up, and that helps you see mental health differently.
That is so much wisdom in that, Caroline. So one thing you mentioned about I'll kind of go in the order, the idea that you're not immune to it. I'll be honest with you, I was like you, had a happy childhood, out of childhood events. My mom and my dad went to school I wanted to go to, study what I wanted to do, right? And I read a stat, and I might be messing the number up, but it was like in your lifetime, 80% of people will have fall under
Yeah.
symptoms that are diagnosable, right? To me, it's
Yeah.
100% if you live long enough, right? Like, because
Yeah.
at some point, life is life, right? You're dealing with stressors, people pass away. I mean, there's so many things here. So I think to normalize that when we go through mental health struggles, not if we do, but that to normalize this experience, it's a part of being a human, right? Part of this massive machine that works really well. I say it's like a, super powerful engine. You got 1,000 horsepower, twin turbo V12. Yeah, without good brake suspension, that may go off the rails. And sometimes, to your point with leadership, is that sometimes those same things that made you high performer can cause you to swerve when you're going too fast. And oftentimes, in my case, when I was my burnout peak, and I had to make those days up and talk to the admin and all that shame. They're like, we don't get it, Diego. You're one of the best doctors here. You're a performance, right? Because we'll hide that, and we say, and in a
Mhm.
certain sense, I had this false belief that, well, if I'm performing well, and somehow I'm managing it, right? I'm still doing it despite all this. Like, I'm still top there. And so you wait for that breakdown to the breakthrough. And we're saying, let's just normalize this as a process, not let to the end. And I think that's really, it might seem an insidious onset, but then the fall seems precipitous. But we've been falling for a while, and no one's immune to it.
Yeah.
We all have brains. It's all going to happen at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, one of my wishes for the world is that we would not have to have a complete breakdown to get the mental health care that we need. And
Yeah.
in fact, like that's what you often see happen,
Yeah.
which is like waiting until you have stage 4 cancer to get care, right?
Great
It's just
analogy.
it's very hard to recover once you're like in a true breakdown. You're
Yeah.
a neurologist, right? Like your brain rewires itself around these things. You don't know how to not be depressed anymore. You don't know how to not have
Yeah.
anxiety. I mean, for me, like now looking back on it, it sounds crazy. But like I would have complete freakouts over things like cheese. Right? Like, it's just
Yeah.
cheese, eat it.
Yeah.
You'd think it
Yeah.
was a
Yeah.
tarantula. Well, and people who work
Right.
with tarantulas are like, what's your problem? It's just a tarantula. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I haven't broken through that one yet, right? I'm still terrified of tarantulas. But like,
Yeah. Yeah.
for something as everyday as food to, have a true like physiological reaction to that, as if it was, something that, I guess it should be a black widow, right? It should be something that could literally like kill me. Um,
Right. Yeah. Our brains
is
hijack the fight or flight to things that aren't fight or flight, and we still feel
Yeah,
that fear. We still feel that adrenaline. Still feel that
yeah.
cortisol going through our veins. And sorry to cut you off, but you mentioned, when I went through my burnout experience, I remember leaving like the day, my last day of residency. Right? I was like, I had done this post-it note. It's a longer story, but I had done this little post-it note for the last like 70 days to get through day by day. I was like, and my
Mhm,
last post-it note was get back to who you are and what you love. Right. And it was
mhm.
just, that's what my thing was day by day. I remember driving on the parking lot and actually feeling this like freedom, this shackles are gone. And I had naively assumed I'm good. I'm out of the situation. But then
Yeah.
I learned over the last few years is that those few years of having those thought patterns, neurons that fire get wired together, the Hebrew hypothesis, right? I had built a very black and white way of seeing the world. All work is bad. And so to me, I almost view burnout like an inflammatory condition for the brain,
Yeah.
right? And you want to minimize the time under the curve, not, oh, I just chronic low inflammation my whole life. That's not good, right? But because those thought patterns, those maladaptive thought patterns become the norm. And then it takes a while to undo those patterns. But the good thing with the brain is if you have a bad habit, you can create a good habit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much hope that the neuroplasticity has revealed to us, right? And I certainly have experienced that. Um, I mean, I don't have those thoughts at all anymore. And I've, now have, how many years? Uh 16 full. No, it's 2025. Good gracious. If I really started my recovery journey in like 2007, so nearly 20
Wow.
years of rewiring it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it took a few years, but it got there, and that hope is there for everyone else too, regardless of whatever it is, right?
Exactly.
We can rewire our brains, and sometimes we need the help of medication, right? There's a lot to that, and I think that there are a lot of conditions for which we don't know how to rewire the brain yet, right? Like,
Yeah.
think of something like schizophrenia, which is really probably like medical and mental health. It kind of like has the same
Yeah.
stigma as mental health, but we know that it's really like, very much neurological in that way. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but my sense, and maybe this is just my endless optimism, I'm a forever optimist, is that you could absolutely break free of something like schizophrenia or like major depression. We just don't know how to do it yet. We're not there.
Mm,
So
yeah, we're just what we know is a tip of the iceberg to what we don't know, and there have been stories of people using music, other things to kind of you know almost crawl their way out of these
right.
places. And unfortunately, our time is getting short. I do have a few more things I want to throw your way, and talk about stigma and leadership, and this idea of this lonely at the top, right? And like loneliness
Mhm.
epidemic happening. So I'm wondering, like, I pulled some numbers out for the research for loneliness, but I'm wondering how this applies to the work you're doing with leaderships. Because I imagine this almost can create loneliness because like no one's like me or I don't want to show who I am. Not being fully there contributes to that. So how does that show up in the work you do or kind of the people that you're serving?
I think it's so it shows up all the time. I mean, yes, so there's this saying that it's lonely at the top, which really means that at that level of the organization, there's a power dynamic with almost everyone around you, and you have very
Mm,
few people, unless you've been very intentional in building like a peer, CEO community or something that feel that they've got your back, right? So there's that. And then add to that the fear and stigma around mental health. And I think you have a recipe for disaster in a way. You have folks that, um, from a stigma point of view, if mental health means that I'm weak or I'm not smart enough or resilient enough, and what the heck am I doing as,
Mm,
a CXO of a company? And I also don't have a community of people that feel safe to talk to. And so as coaches, we often become that community. And do I think that that's sufficient? No, right? Like I want all of my clients to have communities well beyond me where they can get that support that they need. But
yeah,
if the bridge to getting the care that people need is community, then leaders really need to invest in creating the type of community that is healing to them.
yeah. Community is medicine. And
Mm.
we talked about earlier looking at some statistics. There's a lot out there, but I think the kind of one overarching one is that the biggest predictor of longevity is perceived quality of social connections. And when you're feeling stuck, it's like, what do I do? I think I try to, for non-health workers, I think of four important pillars: eating, sleeping, moving, connection. And if you can choose
Yes.
one, this is the biggest bang for the buck. It could feel the hardest because it does rely on others, right? There are other variables to the equation. But as a coach, you can help people do the process to get connections, right? What do you do
Yeah.
process wise that eventually will get you there? There is a lot of unknown. You got to run those experiments, what groups you connect with. It's much more just do the thing, eat the right vegetables, right? So it might seem the most daunting and distant and the most longing sometimes, but this is, if you can choose one, like if you had to choose those four, this is the biggest return on your investment, which often then has cascading effects on the rest. So,
Yeah.
Carolyn, we could talk for hours, and I've been fortunate to talk to you for many before. And one day, let's have you back on. But as we close off here, what resources can your audience members tap into to learn more about you or about some of these things that we discussed today?
Sure, yeah. And the first thing I'd say is feel free to email me, right? My email is carrie@creatingopenspace.com. I'm sure we'll put them in the show notes or something like that for future
Yeah.
reference. And, yeah, folks email me directly. I have a whole like list of resources that I send out in addition to this like recipe for healing community that I share when I talk. And I'm
Mm,
happy to share those with you or jump on a call and just connect directly on what from this episode resonated with you and how I can support you in your journey. So that's probably the easiest way. Actually, no, I came up with two more. Feel free to
nice.
connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can follow me, but I don't like, okay, fine. I'll take followers, but I actually want people to connect with me, right?
Yeah,
The
yeah, yeah,
following thing, like the second LinkedIn is like following. I was like, I don't know about that. To Diego's
yeah,
point, I want connections. And even in LinkedIn connections, the beautiful thing is then as things are going on in your life, it'll pop up on my feed. And
yeah,
so I like connections. And
yeah.
then the other that I would uh, throw out there to coaches and also to offer to your clients is a forum, a free forum that a colleague of mine and I run every month. It's called Leaders for Mental Health. And we just gather leaders who want to have a positive impact on the mental health of their people and
Mm,
just engage in conversation around what are the challenges that they're experiencing when it comes to that. We just help each other think through that. And so, if you know someone who just needs to show up in a super safe space and have a community of fellow leaders, as we were just talking about with the whole lonely at the top thing, um, I'd love to be able to incorporate them into that absolutely free, no sales ever forum. Like it's not about promoting myself, Lori,
it's not a
anything
secret
we do.
marketing ploy to
Yep.
get
It's
emails,
not a
etc.
secret marketing funnel. I promise you, we will never try to sell ourselves. It's literally just to create a community for leaders that don't have that for themselves.
Carolyn, thank you for generosity, and I can attest to that. We met on LinkedIn just randomly I also like to kind of people see what happens. And we've had this beautiful, kind of conversations the last few weeks, months, however it is, and hopefully continue on. So she is very genuine. Please reach out to her. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't know about the last part. I'm gonna have to join that one, Carolyn. So
Yeah, please
you have an
do.
extra member coming up soon. Thank you everyone who watched the episode today. And as we close off, for anyone who is a coach or coach in training and want to get started, we offer a 20% discount for the listeners of our episode today. Type in Salinas 20, Salinas. That's my last name. And number 20, we'll give you 20% off the first 3 months of service so you can get out there and support others the way we want to support everyone else. So thank you very much again, Carolyn. What an honor. Love the episode. And we'll be in touch very soon. And thank you to our listeners today.
Thanks, everyone.
Stream. Stop. Why is the stop not working? Today's been a fun tech issue. Let's
It's
see.
all good.
All right. Well, Carolyn, I'm going to close off because the stop button isn't working.
Okay,
But I'll talk to you
no
later
worries.
offline. Thank you so much. I really love this episode. It was really great having you.
Absolutely. Diego, do you need
Yeah.
me to stick around because it's still uploading till it gets to 100%?
Oh, it'll do automatically. Yeah.
Okay.
It finishes
All
up
right.
automatically. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.